Jennifer. I'm so
Mary,
I'm so happy to have you on. It's been such a long time since we've seen each other in person, so I give you a virtual hug.
same to you. It has been a long time. Yeah,
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 too long, but it's uh, this is a great opportunity to catch up with you.
it is. And it's lovely that we do stay in touch.
Yeah. So, as you know, this is a series on women and creativity, but I always start with the elephant in the room question, which is, how has COVID affected you?
Uh, Personally, I would say not that much because uh, it's kind of a quiet time for me. I guess a potential impact is that a lot of theater and a lot of festivals have been closed.
Mm.
And so, for example, what happened with the Fringe festivals this year is people who were on the waiting, who were on the list for this year, have been moved forward to the next year. So that means that new artists or artists who have new work are not going to be able to do their work for at least another year.
Oh,
So
that's,
it's a bit of a hiccup, right? Because of
yeah.
course the people who have already registered and have already been chosen, they need to have their turn, absolutely. So there's no quibble with that. But for the rest of us, it does mean that we have to put our performance on hold for a little bit. And for performing artists, that's just nothing like an audience.
Hmm. So, have you tried out virtual stages?
Uh, I do belong to a storytelling group, and we've
Hmm.
been meeting virtually. We have a Zoom meeting once a month, and that actually has been wonderful because a lot of organizations across the world for storytelling have been opening up their storytelling. So I was able to attend a festival in Ireland. There's a wonderful group in Newfoundland that meets once or twice a month. Actually, I've been going once a month. So it's wonderful to have, and the group in Victoria. So it has been wonderful to be able to slip into their storytelling groups, and there are lots of performances online as well. But I personally haven't done it, no,
Hmm.
apart from storytelling.
Apart from storytelling, first of all, how do the storytelling groups work?
It depends on the group entirely. So the group that I belong to, or the main group that I belong to, does more traditional stories, but personal stories are welcome as well. It just so what happens is we have three storytellers and also a story circle. So three tellers are chosen ahead of time based on a theme. And then after the third story is finished, there's a short break, and then people can share their personal stories if they wish, or short. I mean, they're maximum 4 minutes, so it could be a poem, it could just be a thought, it could be something that's come out of the storytelling that we've been doing. So it's pretty open, but yeah, and it is quite great to be seeing people in their living rooms.
Hmm.
Not quite as great as seeing them in person, but I like it actually.
Well, of course, and there's that whole new thing about rate your room, right?
I
For
didn't know about
like,
that.
how interesting is your background? And all the hidden eggs and jokes that you might have lurking in the background that only a very media savvy person would understand.
I need to catch up on that for sure.
So, is the virtual stage something in the books for you, do you think, as COVID drags on? Like, here we are fully in the second wave, so it's going to be with us for some time to come, evidently. So, would you consider doing
Yeah, I would. I
you
would,
would?
Mary, absolutely. Yeah, I think, especially personal storytelling, it does. I think it does lend itself really well
Mm.
to the kind of intimacy that this format offers.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Hmm. And you have obviously been a storyteller on these groups using Zoom. So how does it feel in terms of rapport with the audience, which on Zoom is silent for the
Yeah.
most part? So you can't, I imagine, draw energy from, have you been able to pivot as a
Well,
performer?
where you can get a bit of energy is when you have the gallery view on, and you
Hmm.
can actually see people, and then the host of the storytelling group will actually unmute people so they can
Oh,
clap, or you can just see them clapping like this. So there is a bit of that, but to be honest, yeah, it is a bit like speaking into the void, and you
mm.
have to be very mindful of things like where your eyes are. And even now I'm aware that like I want to look at you, but
You look
Paloma
at the
should be
camera.
here. So there are all those, and as you said, the background too. So there are all those things to consider um, that we might not have considered before. But I'm thinking of, I don't know if you remember Spalding Gray, who
Mhm.
was the first monologuist that I heard uh, in that format of storytelling, and basically I saw him at the Vancouver East Cultural Centre quite a few years back, but he sat at a desk,
Mm.
and that was it, and I think
How COVID of him.
exactly right. Yeah, 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 yeah. Way ahead of his time, as he was in so many respects. Um, but it was a pretty static performance, and the strength was in his words. And so it'll be interesting to see what happens with that, right? Because I think the younger generation, with all of the distractions, and even us, right? For even me, I would say, because I don't know, we haven't had a discussion about this, but we're so used to having our phone and the ding of our of alerts that there's an email for us and all of those things. We're so used to all of those distractions. What is it like to look at a person who's completely stationary for 45 minutes?
Mm.
Don't
Very
know.
compelling, I would imagine. Very intense experience.
Yeah, 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 that's right. Yeah.
Well, I imagine with COVID, and I wonder how you've experienced this, storytelling must be at its peak. I imagine people have so many rich and emotional stories to share with everyone.
Yeah, I think that COVID is bringing out a lot of
Mm.
feelings because people, as a rule, have a bit more time. And with time comes reflection. I mean, that's just, I think,
Mhm.
an inevitable part of the process. Um, yeah, and I think we're hungry for that kind of connection, that even though we can't hug right now, we can still kind of look at each other and enjoy that memory of what it was like to just be able to go, oh hi.
Well, hopefully we learn to appreciate personal contact even more.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
And certainly we're starving for contact. And I think this winter is going to be very challenging that way, especially with Christmas maybe being on the bubble. So we're reducing forevermore, it seems, our contacts. But the story lives on, right?
That's right. Yeah. Yeah. Yes, it does. Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's funny because 2 years ago, people were joking about winter is coming.
That's right.
And I was like, ah,
The good old days of Jon Snow.
exactly.
And how has it impacted your creative process at all, COVID? Has it, how did you feel when it first had a big impact in your life? Did it shift things? Did it interrupt things? Or did you go full steam ahead?
Uh, well, I'm a person who likes to work to a deadline.
Mm.
And so, mentally for me, I might have had, I mean, what I don't have now is going, okay, I'm going to apply for this fringe, or I'm going to apply for this festival. And I'm going to have something ready for it, or uh, edit something so that it's better. You know what I mean? Like all those
Mhm.
processes that we do go through. So because I have no deadline, it has opened the doors for other things. And to be honest, because I'm working on my master's degree right now.
Mm.
I decided to go back to school at my ripe old age because I'd wanted to do it for a long time. And I think the lockdown was like sort of mid-March last year. And I was just in the middle of doing my last classes and my final paper and so on. And so, to be honest, it wasn't until probably the middle of April where it had any change in my life at all. I mean, you do notice a difference in terms of, at that time we were like thinking about washing our groceries when we came home and, all of that stuff, right? So, so of course that was a bit of a change, but in terms of going out and so on, seeing friends and so on, it didn't really make that much of a difference because I would have been stuck to my computer anyway.
Mm-hmm. Interesting.
Today. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
yeah.
And what prompted you to go back to school? You say you've wanted to do your master's for a long time. Why now? And what was the motivation behind it?
Yeah, because I had always felt that there were gaps in my learning, things that I wanted to learn, and I could never really decide if I wanted to. I mean, I always want to pursue fine arts, creative writing, and painting as well, but I felt that I should do something for my career, but I wasn't really excited about that. So I just kept thinking about it, and Mary, I thought about it for 10 years. And sort of after 10 years, I thought I could have done both by now. But a friend of mine had done the graduate program in liberal studies at Simon Fraser University. And it's a program that just opens so many doors. And there are so many opportunities to, for example, the paper that I'm working on right now, we had a choice. Now it is for a writing class, but we did have a choice of doing an academic essay, a personal essay, or creative nonfiction, or a piece of fiction.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it's fantastic. And so, we all have the same information. We're given the same readings to do and so on and so forth. But how we want to interpret that, for the most part, has a bit of flexibility, which is great.
Oh, that's wonderful. So in at least in this course, you have your creative element anyways.
That's right. Yeah. And a new one for me, creative nonfiction is a new one for me. So,
Mm-hmm.
yeah. Yeah. And
Well,
in
that
fact,
sounds
the
exciting.
last term, I was able to write a short play instead of writing an academic paper.
Really?
Yeah. Yeah.
And
It's a
what does that
conversation
look
between
like?
Sigmund Freud and Virginia Woolf.
Oh, how fun. Now, is that something you would perform?
I don't know because it's a two-hander, and I don't know. I mean, I can't remember enjoying writing a piece so much, right? Because he's a bit of a stick in the mud, and he's a bit of a sexist, I guess you could say. And then of course there's Virginia Woolf, who's so brilliant. So basically there are conversations based on Sigmund Freud's question, "What is it that a woman wants?" and Virginia Woolf's answer, "A room of one's own."
Mm.
So in the play, she basically takes him to all the places that she visits in that novel and explains things.
Well, it seems like a conversation we could have today. It's amazing how the dial has not turned much in that regard.
It is amazing. It really is, Mary. Yeah,
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 and sad.
yeah, yeah.
Mm-hmm. So the other question I give everyone is, what is your creative process? And I know a deadline's part of it.
Yeah, 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 yeah. I know, and I wish I could say that I'm one of these disciplined people who gets up at 7 o'clock in the morning and has my shower and eats breakfast and then sits down and starts writing. But I'm not. I tend to go over things in my head a lot, and at a certain point, I feel almost like ideas won't leave me alone.
Mm.
Like I can be waiting for a bus stop and I see like a piece of graffiti and I go, "Oh, I have to incorporate that." Or, I'll be scrolling through Facebook and somebody will post something like just some kind of meme. I go, "Oh, I have to incorporate that." Or so it's always building. And as I'm walking around, I'm always having these conversations in my head or working something through, or even I could even wake up at 3 o'clock in the morning, you know. I mean, it's just like it's always, always, always in process. And then at a certain point, I have to sit down and write.
Mm. So
Or,
do you carry a notebook around, or you're able to remember all those brilliant ideas?
well, not sure about brilliant, because some of them, you know, as soon as you write them, you go, oh no, that was a dream. Or maybe useful for something else, you know, because
Mhm.
it's all things that we're kind of playing with in our head. I do tend to keep a notebook with me, um, or we'll just write on any scrap of paper that I have handy. Yeah.
Mhm. I tried at one point to make it a habit to bring a little notebook, but again, it's like anything else. It's something you have to learn to do and learn to remember that you have it. And um, but it's a wonderful thing sometimes. And I wonder if you have this uh, happen to you. Sometimes you almost feel like you've done the project in your head and it's done, and you're an audience of one, you appreciate it, but the execution is a different process altogether and may or may not happen. Has that happened to you?
Oh, absolutely. Right. And thinking about working in theater, I mean, I have a friend who's a really great dramaturge who's been great, very generous in working with me, Deborah Porter Taylor. And she, you know, sometimes I'll write something that I think is like the best thing ever, and she'll just look at it and go, yeah, no. It doesn't go. Like, it might be great. It may or may not be great. It may or may not be interesting and clever and anything that we would want from a piece of theater, but it doesn't fit here, you know. So it has to go to another piece, or it has to just kind of sit on hold for a while until it becomes its own piece of
This
theater.
is the question I always have for creatives. Like, uh, how do you know? Do you have that inner knowing that this is good? Can you judge your own work? Um, or is everything painful and you're uncertain about how it is? Or do you have that inner knowing is basically my question, that this is a good piece and I need to move forward with it?
uh, yeah, it's a complicated question, Mary, and I don't profess to have any right answers about that. But I think the big question is, the first question is, do I love it? Am
Mm.
I happy with it? Do I feel that this is saying what I want to say? And then you need to, and I mean, and that is the main thing. You know, you kind of go through it and you look, you know, you do your editing and you look for flaws, you look for things that could be done better, and so on and so forth. But in the end, it's you know, it's what you have to say and how you say it. Then of course there's theater, where you have to think about the audience as
Mm.
well, right? So, but I mean, I think that it might sound a bit weird to say, but I think that, you know, as artists, our first loyalty has to be to ourselves, and if we love our work. But I mean, theaters, I think, is a particular dynamic where, I mean, in my last show, which you saw, you know, there was one scene that was quite intense, and when I was writing it, I thought, I really do need to be sure that the audience isn't sitting there thinking, why the hell did I sign up to see this show, right? Because
Mm.
it's an assault, right? And
Mhm.
nobody wants to have that experience. So there is a bit of that as well.
Before we go into that amazing show, I want to crystallize your creative process a little bit. Um, for example, do you make a distinction between the creative aspect and the editing aspect, or do you edit as you go along?
I do both,
You do
actually.
both.
Do both, yeah, yeah. Um, there is something that's quite marvelous about just kind of having the muse with you and just sitting and not stopping. But I think over time, I've just become a little bit more adept at paying attention to rhythm, or paying attention to symbols or metaphors or things like that are sort of always on the back of my mind. But then maybe the next day or a couple of days later, it's really important to sit down and do some editing. Yeah. What I really love doing when I get a good rhythm is editing the previous day's work in the first, and then continuing with the current day's work.
Oh, so you get that flow then.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And on a perfect day, that's what can happen.
Mm-hmm. Yes, because I imagine the stop, start is very hard to get into. What does your creative day look like? Are you a morning, afternoon, evening? Do you give yourself a block of time, or do you give yourself the end of really the idea for the day and the editing for the day? How does that work?
Yeah, it has changed over time. I used to be a person who always wrote at night. And what I'm finding now, and I'm not sure if it's a function of age or caffeine, is that I really do prefer editing in the morning. And often I process things while I'm sleeping, you know, and often I wake up with ideas, or, you know, in that morning, there's that sort of half awake, half asleep, not quite dreaming stage, where I'll be mulling over something and it might come to me. And then I need to sit down right away and process it right away. Yeah.
And of course, in the morning, we're our most rational, apparently.
Well, and that's why I think why it's so good for editing. And I didn't know that actually, but it makes sense.
Now, you mentioned a muse. So do you have a muse?
I don't know if I have a muse, but definitely a muse or muses. Sure. And I mean, they're not always there. Well, maybe they are always. They're not always speaking to me, because there are those, you know, there are those moments. And I would guess that almost everybody has them, right? Where it's almost as if, I don't want to sound too out there, but it's almost as if,
you can sound out there, why not?
But it's almost as if there's some other process going on that our linear mind saying this word, this word, this word, this word, these go together, these have meaning, you know. It's just like, it's almost like being possessed or something by an idea, and the writing is pretty automatic, you know. And then, I mean, it doesn't always happen that way. It doesn't always happen that way at all, but it is pretty wonderful when you actually like what's come out and you can look at it 2 days later and go, where did that come from? You know, it's like way beyond, I think, what my linear mind could create.
It sounds so magical.
Very exciting when that happens, and it doesn't happen often, but when it does, oh boy. Yeah.
That's the ideal, isn't it?
Yeah.
So when that happens, do you feel like Jennifer Martin is doing this, writing this, creating this, or do you feel like you're almost channeling another?
Yeah, almost like I'm like almost like I'm a medium, you know, like not, I mean, there is a bit of critical judgment on my part about what's coming out, but not a lot, no.
And how do you storyboard your work, or do you let your characters do whatever? They're independent of you, so you're willing to, if they do something surprising, you can shift with them? How does that work?
Yeah, that does happen. So generally, I have an idea for a piece. I generally know how it begins and ends. And the question is, what happens in the middle? And how it ends can change, actually, depending on what happens in the middle. And yes, characters do surprise me sometimes, you know. And it's like the classic joke about, you know, writing and having a nap and waking up to find that your character has moved to Montreal. You know, those kinds of things do happen. Absolutely, yeah.
I love that. So, have you had surprises like that, where a piece just went in a direction you had not envisaged at all?
Yes, yeah, yeah. Um, well, and and as our life story changes, I mean, so in the play that you saw, there's a scene about breaking up with my fiance. We're going years back, and I mean, at the time, of course, it was a pretty horrible experience, and I was trying to think of something funny for my play because I didn't want it to be just all like, you know, sad stories or difficult stories. And I was thinking about like what was a funny thing about that relationship? So I couldn't find a wedding dress, right? And of course, looking back on the story, every single person in the audience as an adult knows, well, she can't find a wedding dress because she doesn't want to get married, right? Like deep in her heart, she doesn't want to get married. So, but I mean, this was a completely new thing for me when I started writing that little piece, right? When I started writing that piece. And actually, I mean, I think it's Philip Lopate who was a creative nonfiction guy. I still is a creative nonfiction guy, actually. He's still with us. But one of the things he wrote in one of his essays about writing was that we should always try to surprise ourselves. Right, we should always try to surprise ourselves. And so in order to do that, we have to accept and encourage a certain kind of vulnerability within ourselves and a certain critical judgment as well, and not let ourselves off the hook. I mean, even thinking about that story, that particular story about finding out that my ex-fiance was cheating on me and so on and so forth is like, I have to consider, how was I a jerk in that story? You know what I mean? And so there are always these things that it's like looking at any event is like looking through a kaleidoscope, and we look at it, we can, oh yeah, somebody is to blame. They were behaving really badly. They broke my heart. And then you shift it a little bit and go, yeah, but I was kind of a jerk too. So these things always surprise us and amaze us. And when we can find them, it's exciting.
Mm-hmm. Are you primarily writing for theater?
Well, I mean, that has always been what I love to do. But now that I've discovered creative nonfiction,
That's tweaked you, eh?
yeah, it's pretty exciting. It's pretty exciting, yeah. So in class, we're reading Joan Didion and James Baldwin and authors, Thomas King, right? And they're just, it's amazing. It's amazing to be reading these stories. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So that's an avenue that you might travel on then?
I think so. I hate to put those words out loud when I haven't really thought about it, but in a way, it's not so different from personal storytelling, right?
No, exactly. And when you write as a performer as well, I imagine it's quite a layered approach because you're not only writing, but you're also thinking how it would look on stage.
Yes, yeah. And also a character. I mean, one of the things that came up with my last show was a critic asking, what's the difference between this and therapy? Right? And I think that is the art of it, and also a bit of a difficult process is being able to separate the stories from our lives from therapy and make them into art, right? And then that does take a certain kind of consciousness, and you start thinking of not of this is my story, but this is the story that I'm working with. Yeah.